Welcome back to the Center for Applied Theology and Urban Abbey, and this our 17th session dealing with Rene Descartes' Meditations. And with us again tonight is Professor Alan Hall from the University of St. Thomas in New Brunswick, Canada. He will be leading us through our discussion, and because we introduced him last week, we won't go over that again, but I will ask Father David Harris to come forward and lead us in our first question. Please, Father Harris.
Thank you, Professor Hall. If you, just to set things in context, because Descartes is such an important moment, if you took 15 or 20 minutes, don't worry about thinking you're rambling. Set things in context about Descartes, maybe particularly about the Meditations, who he was, what's going on around him intellectually, and what are the Meditations? This pivotal text in Western history.
I'm good. Okay. Thank you. So, Father Harris, you asked a question last week about Francis Bacon that I felt I didn't answer very well, and I don't have a better answer for it now, but I've been thinking about it. And it's related to Descartes, which is, where does he come from? That is, there seems to be something so strange. It seemed to be something so strange in Bacon that his method appeared to be so very different than anything that we had sort of seen before. His mode of writing, all of these sorts of things. I think this is very true of Descartes as well. And there is certainly a sort of self-conscious newness in Descartes. And so anyway, this is, I think, kind of a fascinating and difficult question. Descartes is taken to be by many, or spoken about as if he were he's sort of the father of the father of modern philosophy, or sort of one of the great first characters in what we take to be modern philosophy. And I think it's safe to say, though Bacon is very, I think, potent, and it's so significant in all kinds of ways, Descartes has a kind of I guess philosophical substance that certainly is taken up in its content more widely, I think, than Bacon. And soon Descartes is recognized in his own time as being a significant thinker. So my answer, I don't really have an answer to this, except I was thinking about, I don't know if any of you have been to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. It's in Florence, yeah, where you go along and you see all these paintings and they're chronological, and you have these wonderful late medieval paintings that are so beautiful. And I'm sure I'm not the only one here who feels this way. They're just astonishingly beautiful and sort of obviously allegorical, full of sort of signs and meanings and relationships, that you could feel like the activity of interpreting them is a kind of education and a kind of illumination into man and God and nature and all of these sorts of things. And then all of a sudden, and it really does feel like it's all of a sudden, you hit these Renaissance paintings and you're like, where did those come from? Like, there's something kind of shocking about it. Now, of course, you can do work to show where they come from, but the shock is very actual. Like, it really is a striking transition to those paintings, which would be modern, right? These Renaissance, like Michelangelo or whatever. And there's a kind of shock of recognition of, I think, of ourselves. I remember something of it when I used to teach in the foundation year program at King's, and we'd be reading along and all of a sudden we'd read Montaigne or Shakespeare, and it would feel like oh, well, that's just me. Like, you know, when you sort of do this work with students to sort of move into the thinking of Dante, and it becomes very beautiful and profound. But when they read Hamlet, they're not like, oh, who's this guy? They're like, oh yeah, I went to high school with Hamlet. Like, I know exactly who this is. So there is something new and striking in this time. Descartes, I think, is a bit like this. So he comes from a fairly wealthy family. He's educated in one of the new Jesuit schools in France. He's French. So he receives this sort of, this rigorous Jesuitical education, is trained in scholastic philosophy through that, of course. Also there is, sort of learns mathematics, which becomes so important for him. He becomes a bit itinerant, sort of wanders around. He joins the army for a while, but doesn't really see any action. And then begins to make a name for himself. Sort of starts in his mid-30s or so, or no, early 30s, writing. It would appear, it would appear that he had a kind of mystical vision, sitting, and this will be important for those of us those of you guys who've read the Meditations, in a small cabin by a wood stove, of a kind of, over a couple of days, it would seem, he had a series of sort of these visions or dreams or something, whereby he sort of was able to see that he could reformulate the foundations of knowledge. I mean, I mentioned a bit before with Bacon, he's living at a time there, he's sort of a contemporary of Galileo, a little bit after Galileo. He's a little bit after Bacon. So there's been a lot of work that I spoke about last week in sort of in what we now think of as science. So discoveries in the natural world that have cast maybe, or have been something of a challenge, I think, for this is a kind of external challenge to the scholastic philosophy that was being taught at the universities and schools. There's also those internal movements in that philosophy that we talked about weeks earlier, that we heard about weeks earlier with the nominalists and Nicholas of Cusa and etc. So he's writing after that. He sort of then, in a way that's really striking and peculiar as well, this early modern period seems to have been, this is something that happens. He sort of moves across a series of fronts all at once. So he makes significant contributions to mathematics. I mean, this may be his largest, I mean, philosophy certainly, but I think it may be in mathematics that, I mean, his contribution to mathematics is astonishingly significant. It seems to me, I'm not a historian of mathematics, but what he does, as many of you will know, and you guys all know Cartesian coordinates, which are named after Rene Descartes. So this is a sign that you've sort of made it when you have people have forgotten that your name is actually being used to describe something they use all the time. What he does, and this is, you can sort of see the influence of this a little bit in the Meditations, is that he starts to develop ways in which geometry and algebra might be brought together. So another way to put this is that he starts to develop ways to investigate geometry using algebraic formula. This then goes on to become significant in the development of calculus, but also just in how we do analytical geometry. And this, or it's sometimes called Cartesian geometry. So he's he's extraordinarily influential and significant there in mathematics. He also develops a theory of physics, which is based on an insight that he shares in the Meditations about the infinite sort of divisibility of matter. So he looks something like he's bringing back a kind of atomism. So he develops that in physics. That doesn't have quite the legs that his mathematics does. Newton in particular sort of takes that on and argues against it very deliberately in the Principia. He also writes about the passions, human passions. But it's actually in something of an introduction to his work on the geometry that he introduces his discourse on method. So like Bacon, he becomes interested in a kind of scientific or philosophical method that will give us a kind of certainty. He writes about that in Discourse on Method. That's 1637, I think, 1637. That then gets picked up. So what actually the Meditations is, in one sense, he puts it out 4 years later, and it's an attempt to sort of address some of the concerns and questions that have come out of that Discourse on Method. So it's a more fully realized sort of picture of what he was trying to formulate in the Discourse on Method. And as such, it operates in one way as a kind of a methodological introduction to what he takes to be a kind of way of achieving certain knowledge in the sciences. That's happening at one level. I think, though, what's so striking about the Meditations, and I think one of the reasons it has such legs, is that it is a whole bunch of things at once. So there's all sorts of things sort of collapsing and condensing into that text. It's sort of fighting a war on many fronts all at once. And as such, it's a very, for such a short text, really, it's an astonishingly transformative text, because it seems to sort of redescribe in philosophy, maybe the questions we ought to be asking. It gives us some problems that in their modern form that seem quite new, or at least it gives them their particular form that in many ways we continue to struggle with. Descartes, he continues to be taught across, I mean, if you take philosophy, you're going to run into Rene Descartes in first year, probably, right? Second year. And that's true if you take it from a heavily sort of analytical school, or a phenomenological school, or a historical school, or whatever. The Descartes is going to feature. So he has become, the problematic he introduces, if I can put it in that horrible way, we continue to live within it in some real sense. He's also, and I find this fascinating, I have to say, you guys, and I would love someone to write a paper on it or something. It wouldn't be a philosophical paper, it'd be something else. People just seem to hate him. Like, people hate, continues to be an extraordinarily divisive character. Students have a very strong response to him. So that is a very, what else do I want to say? Is there any sort of follow-ups? Oh, this is one more thing maybe to say. I think he is also, this text in particular, the Meditations, is a remarkably teachable text. I have some weird theory that this is one of the reasons it's persisted as much as it has, is that it has, like other texts, like the Nicomachean Ethics or the Republic or whatever, Dante, it's very delightful and lends itself to teaching, which is intentional. He wanted it to be like that. He also was extraordinarily influential on the development of logic. So, blah, blah, blah. there is an absolutely intentional desire in Descartes, which he gives voice to replace Aristotle as with a kind of new vision of what knowledge is. That's his project. That comes out in the Principles of Philosophy. That's 1644. That's the work of that. And it gets taken up. It gets taken up. A lot of his work is built right into the Port Royal logical textbook that then becomes widely used in France during the early modern and Enlightenment period. It becomes extremely influential in that way. Yeah. Anyway, I hope, is there any, that's blabbing along, but there, I hope there's anyway, there you go. There's some stuff.
Can I follow up on that by then bringing us into the first meditation of Descartes? He sets this scene of wanting to basically tear down all the structures of the past that have been given to them, all the philosophical knowledge, all these things that they understood. He famously sits there by the fireplace, wondering whether or not he's dreaming, wondering whether or not this is the real world. This kind of radical use of doubt and skepticism, is it original to him? And why does he see the need to use it? Why does he see the need to take this path? And maybe also, what are the consequences of it, and what are the underlying assumptions that he's making? If it is something that's kind of been done before, is this, what's he doing unique to what's been done before? Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, I think. Well, there's certainly nothing new in skepticism. No. That is skepticism in different forms, has sort of been a part of philosophy since the very, very beginning of Western philosophy. So there's, I think what I might say about what's interesting about his skepticism, and I think what some people find maybe frustrating about his skepticism, is that on the one hand, it's quite radical. But on the other hand, it doesn't really seem like skepticism at all, if I can put it that way. That is, it's often described as a kind of methodological doubt. I think what's striking about Descartes, and now, Daniel, I'm not really able to answer, I'll try to answer, maybe I'll just answer this way and remind me, because I'm leaving part of your question out here in this answer, but I think what's it seems to me that what is unique about his argument, and maybe new, is that he is methodological about his doubt, but that doubt is actually quite radical. So he's able to use quite a radical doubt in the service of creating a new kind of certainty, a new kind of grounding of certainty. Now, a lot of work has been done to show sort of antecedents, particularly in, I mean, even at the time, and this is a fascinating thing that there are people, I think, on this Zoom call who are more qualified to speak about than I am, but even at the time, Augustine, many people thought that what he was doing was a kind of renewal or return to a kind of rigorous Augustinian philosophy. So he himself isn't unhappy with that connection, but doesn't think he's doing that. There's also been a fair bit of work where people have wanted to show, Jean-Luc Marion, I think, that many of the sort of modes of arguments that he uses have clear antecedents in medieval philosophy. I mean, it seems to me it's not his argument for his proof for the existence of God in the fifth meditation is very, very close to Anselm's argument. So close that I often use Anselm's argument when I'm teaching the text because I find it clearer. So I just say, oh, this is the same argument. So it would seem that a lot of his arguments he's using have been used before. The language I mean, you guys, the ones of you who've read Meditation 3, you will have found this very strange language around formal and objective truth. That comes directly from the scholastic tradition that he'd been trained in. So there's a real way in which much of this text would have been, is very much of a kind of late medieval scholasticism. But it seems to me what's striking about Descartes is that he uses these, those arguments, those categories to his own ends, to a kind of new ends, and so transforms them, I think, or makes them work in different ways than they'd worked before. Yeah. So I think, and part of that is I mean, we can talk about how radical his doubt is. I don't know what people's responses were to it, but that sort of making that doubt methodologically significant, that seems to me to be a kind of key part of his text that I mean, goodness, there's a lot of books I haven't read, that's for sure. So I might be missing it, but that seems to me to belong to him in a way that's quite striking. Yeah.
Okay. So in his search for what we can actually know, he comes out with what's probably his best known saying, which is and forgive me if I mispronounce this, I don't know if you use a hard G or a soft one, cogito o cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Could you unpack this a little bit for us, please?
Okay, so in the first meditation, so what we have in these we have in the meditations, we get 6 meditations, and there's these sort of, they work as a kind of sustained argument from like point A to point B. His desire, it's his stated desire sort of at the beginning, right, is to seek certainty. He wanted to have certainty. And guys, here's the problem. I mean, and I worry that maybe I overstate this. It just seems to me to be a really sort of significant moment that as Dunn puts it, right, the new sciences have thrown all in doubt. That we may be in motion or we may be still. There's no principle which we can sort of appeal to decide one way or the other, right? So all of these things that seem, and I'm always sort of trying to encourage my students to sort of think about this because it seems to me so striking. I mean, there's this sort of modern inclination, particularly in the sort of natural sciences, to say, well, we use reason and observation now to come up with theories. But I think this is in some way completely bananas, because any sort of real observation of the world will teach you with absolute certainty that you are still, like, you're not spinning around anything, right? This seems to me to be crazy. So the opening up of this possibility that our senses may be so broken, right? What I think is a significant moment, and it's where Descartes wants to start. So, and in his hyperbolic way, says, look, I'm just going to deny, if anything's ever misled me, I'm going to deny it as the ground of possibility. Senses, gone. They're gone. You can't trust them, so we won't trust them ever, he says. I mean, this is the sort of, there's something sort of insane about his method here, but that's what he does. We're not going to trust them ever. Never, 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 ever. Gone. Then he moves, and I think the sort of, and as a long way of answering your question, but then the movement, right? Like, he then moves to mathematics. Like, there's this, it's not just that he's skeptical in a kind of blanket way, like he's methodologically skeptical or methodologically doubting. He then moves to mathematics. He says, look, unlike my senses, or another, I mean, and he doesn't just doubt his senses. He's like, I don't believe what's happening right now. He says, I'm dreaming right now. Now I am dreaming. I'm dreaming all the time, right? And then he says, but there's things I can't even doubt in my dreams. I can't even doubt in my dreams. So I think there's a kind of reasonable expectation at that point that when you say that, you're like, those things are certain then, right? Mathematics. I can't doubt squares in my dreams. I can't doubt that the interior angles of a square equal 360 degrees, right? I can't doubt that in my dream. I can't come up with a square that's somehow different than squares. Like that seems to hold my, he's got other things too, right? And I think there's a reasonable expectation at that point that you'd be like, oh, those things must be real. But Descartes' like, no, I'm going to doubt those. How am I going to doubt those? This way. There's an evil genius who's putting thoughts in my head, which is, it's sort of so hyperbolic, right? Like, it's extreme. And this idea, like, he gives us this sort of, and this is a perennial in modern philosophy, right? This comes up again in the 20th century, the problem of guru. Like, he gives us this problem, and the way it's talked about then is that maybe I'm a brain in a vat, but it's essentially the brain in the vat argument that he gives us. That how can I know that there's just, that anything that's in my mind, hasn't simply been put there by some sort of accident, or even by some sort of malicious being, right? Who's hell-bent for whatever peculiar reason on deceiving me at all points. All right. So this is kind of how he ends meditation 1. So it's not maybe I can't know things, maybe what I know, I think I know is true, isn't true. It's none of that. It's maybe I'm actively being deceived at all points by an evil genius who has complete access to my consciousness, right? That's where we are. And so what the I think, therefore I am becomes is a kind of fulcrum point, or a kind of moment of certainty in that sea of doubt. And it, in some senses, is very simple, right? He says, look, if I'm doubting everything, what I cannot doubt is that I'm doubting. Because that is, again, I mean, this is sort of simple, you've got this, but that is to doubt. And so you get this, I kind of love this moment. It looks like an infinite regress. Well, I'll doubt that I'm doubting. Well, I'm doubt that I'm doubting. Well, I'm doubt that. But Descartes turns it, right, into a kind of bedrock moment and says, aha, I've learned something. I am a doubting thing. And whatever it may be that this evil genius wants to shower down on my head, I can doubt it. As long as I'm doubting it, I know that I'm a thing, a doubting thing. And then he says, which is a thinking thing. So this, I think, therefore I am moment, which the actual wording of that comes from the Discourse on Method, but it's here this in the same way, this sort of famous formulation. It's made, it's not a kind of, it's a very kind of fascinating moment, because on the one hand, it's an affirmation. I know what I am, I'm a thinking thing, right? But within the context of the meditations, it also tells us in another way, it tells us absolutely nothing. So it gives us something, I'm a thinking thing, there's your moment of certainty, but it gives you nothing because we still have no idea if any of these things that we think have any reality to them, they may just be delusional, right? So in a way, there's no content to it in that regard at all. It's a purely, what Hegel might call, it's a purely negative moment. Like there's a kind of purely negative moment here. Our consciousness, we see that it's real and has some sort of constitution to it, but what it's full of is completely unknown to us, or its content has no certainty at all, right? So it's still as if we're dreaming. We could be dreaming, but we know that we're a dreaming thing, as it were. That's maybe a wrong way to put it, but we have this moment of awake. We know we can't be deceived that we're a thinking thing. We can know that without the possibility of deception. But at that point in the argument where he says, I think, therefore I am, it's perfectly possible where he is in the argument that he could be being deceived about every other thing. Yeah, yeah.
Just to follow on from that, though, it rather seems that I can't doubt that I'm doubting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be based on the law of non-contradiction. And so therefore it seems like this moment of certainty is actually underpinned by a self-evident truth that Descartes is taking for granted. Would he acknowledge that? Is that the case? Would it pose a problem for him? I'm curious.
Oh, help me understand. Say more, say more.
Okay, so this I can't doubt that I'm doubting. This, like I say, it seems to be based on the law of non-contradiction. So he's taking the law of non-contradiction for granted. But who's to say he's not being deceived about that as well? I mean, it all risks becoming a little bit weird and metaphysical at this point, but that was just kind of what occurred to me when I was thinking about it.
How do you mean with the law of non-contradiction, that something can't both be and not be at the same time?
Basically, yes. So if I'm doubting that I'm doubting, that means I'm doubting, so I can't not be doubting. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? So if he's saying that we can take absolutely nothing for granted, and we can't trust anything, why could we? I mean, of course, it's a basic principle of logic, isn't it? But that was just kind of what came into my head. I wonder what you would think about that.
I think he's okay, but and I think, but Lucy, I may be missing the deeper point of your question, so I'm worried about that. But I think he's okay because I think, so the question is, does Descartes assume the principle of non-contradiction? I guess what I'd wonder is it, I think I'm doubting, but I might not be. Because that seems to be a moment of doubt to me. In which case you've secured that sort of purely negative point, if I can put it that way. That's not a great way of putting it, but that purely negative point that he seems to think he needs to be at needs to get to in order to find that certainty. That is, it's an interesting question, but we say, oh, well, perhaps this evil genius in my brain is just making me think I'm doubting. That seems to me to have that moment of doubt I think he's okay, but I'll have to think about it more carefully. And I might be missing the crux of your question.
Yeah, I mean, what I was really getting at is that he seems to really say that we can't take anything for granted. We can't, as a starting point, he's searching for some kind of solid ground, but the solid ground he reaches seems to be based on the idea that if you're doubting, therefore you must be doubting, and there's no contradiction in that. Which again, it might be. It just seems that there's that, like I say, it's a self-evident truth, and perhaps, but it's not something that you can prove. So it seems to be that's the kind of bedrock of the argument. But I could. We risk going down a weird little rabbit hole here, and I don't want to distract the conversation too much, so I should probably let Dan or Father come in.
No, I mean, Lucy, something I will say, look, I mean, I don't want to, this may be not the best time to say this, but in meditation, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating to me about this text is that in meditation 3, he'll actually say, look, what our first thought isn't this self-constituting thought, I think, therefore I am. That we learn is predicated on a deeper thought, which is the thought of God. That is that the apprehension of God as an infinite being is a prior apprehension to the apprehension of ourself as a finite being, which is what so that it turns out that there is a thought under that thought, if I can put it that way, but we don't know that yet. So it's a very peculiar text in that regard, that he seems to be saying that sort of thought of self-constituting, of sort of that thought, which is the constituting moment of self-consciousness, if I can put it that way, that I think, therefore I am, turns out within the structure of the argument of the text, well, that turns out to be that sort of first moment of certainty, that sort of self-constituting thought, that self-relation, or however you want to put it. That, it turns out, so look, so some people, and I'm just sort of riffing here, some people look at that and they're like, oh, that's where modern philosophy begins. I think, therefore I am. The self is a self-constituting thought. You realize, you are a thinking thing, you are the self-constituted thinking thing, and then it shoots through, you end up with Kant, you end up with like man is, like this sort of this is modern philosophy, this dare to know that Kant gives us, right? But so that's there. Clearly, second meditation, I think, therefore I am, self-constituted, self-understand, blah, blah, blah. But in the third meditation, he's like, oh no, that's a secondary thought. The prior thought is the prior apprehension is of God, the infinite. And so there is a kind of, fascinating, for me, there's a fascinating tension, maybe a tension there, or a kind of depth to the text, certainly. Yeah. Sorry, is that okay? Was that insane? That's okay.
No,
that's okay.
Okay. I was just thinking as you were speaking that perhaps it connects to this idea of the natural light that he talks about, which is this fundamental intuition we have for the truth. Maybe that could shed some insight. I don't know.
Oh, I see, Lucy. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is actually quite difficult. What would you like me? Do you have something in mind? What would you like me to say here? I can try this.
It wasn't meant to be a leading question. It was just a thought. Maybe that has something to do with it, and perhaps I'm derailing the discussion, and I ought not to. But he introduces this concept of the natural light to mean this fundamental intuition of the truth, and so. But he doesn't go into how far we're able to trust it, of course, and I don't know.
Yeah.
He says whatever the natural light shows us. Oh, sorry.
So go ahead.
he says that whatever the natural light shows us, for example, that I'm doubting, therefore I exist, that can't be doubtful. So perhaps that's what's,
Yes.
in other ways, it's just another way of saying that we have faith in truths that are self-evident, perhaps.
Yeah, this is, I mean, no, this is going to become very important. The other way he puts this is, I mean, the language here is he says, if I have clear and distinct understanding, right? That's the other way he puts that, right? So I think therefore this apprehension of the self as a thinking thing, he's like, well, this is a kind of clear and distinct understanding that I have. And then the second moment of clear and distinct understanding that he's going to have is in meditation 3, when he apprehends the source of his ideas of God cannot be him, right? That's the second moment of clear and distinct understanding. And it's going to be those two moments that allow him to sort of bring the world back as a kind of possibility.
Can I bring you on to that third meditation now and sort of ask?
Sure.
So we've had
you've saved me from trying to answer a very difficult
You
question.
can have some long
Sorry.
email exchange with each other at some point.
Don't be sorry. It's delightful. I'm just grateful to Daniel for the yeah. Go ahead. I'll try to come. Yes. Go. Yes, please go.
So we've had the extreme skepticism, the affirmation of that a thinking thing, and in the third meditation now we're going to have this argument of affirming God. And I was wondering if you could sort of draw that out for us, how he gets to that. And maybe it seemed like there was elements from what you were just saying, the links between each of these parts. Maybe you could bring those out, but principally what's going on in this third meditation.
So I think, the simple way, I guess a simpler way to put this would be to say that he's, the problem of this first meditation, the second meditation, right, that he carries forward is, okay, Daniel, just one sec, sorry. I'm going to just say this, and then we're going to answer your excellent question. Lucy, I think the question is there a logic implicit in this, or is it a kind of revelation? This is a fascinating question. I want to go with revelation. And the reason I want to do that is that I think the logic is developed afterwards.
Okay, could you tell us more?
Well, I'll try, and I'll try to do it by answering. I'm just freestyling here. Look, I'm trying to answer your question.
Fine.
But I'll do it by trying to answer Daniel's question, because I think Descartes Descartes, the question of meditation 3, so there's one way of putting it. Descartes if I put it sort of in terms of the sort of needs of the argument or something like that, what Descartes needs in meditation 3 is a way of moving outside of his mind, as it were. That is, we have a kind of self-constituting moment there in meditation 2, I think therefore I am, but there's no way of knowing if we are kind of trapped in this solitude of our minds, if I can put it that way, or something like that. It's a deep solipsism of being manipulated, of somehow these ideas coming from nowhere but a dream that we may be having. So that's the kind of problem he carries forward into meditation 3. And the work of meditation 3 is to establish that there are ideas in our minds that we cannot be the source of or the author of. And it's in his apprehension of God, infinite, all-powerful, omniscient, that he makes the argument, and I'm not going to go into the technicalities there. I can if you'd like. It's quite a. I mean, I find it in some ways quite a difficult argument, quite technical, but that this apprehension of God shows him that he can't be the source as something that is finite, frail, particular, of ideas of the infinite, omniscience, all-powerful, etc. And because of that, there must be some being, God, who is the source of these ideas. So at the level of sort of the movement through the meditations of what that ultimate goal of certainty that he's seeking, I think that's what's going on in meditation 3. But if we want to push it a little more, maybe not push it a little more, but the moment there is, his argument is, and I think, Lucy, maybe this is to what your question is, and this is where Descartes is amazing, I think, and strange. He says, when we have a capacity within us to apprehend the infinite in a way that is absolute and beyond properties or particularities. So when we apprehend the infinite as a moment of apprehension, we are able to sort of apprehend it, see it, as it were, have it in our minds as a kind of wholly constituted moment. This is, I think, very important for his argument. So the infinite, in other places becomes, is talked about as a kind of you can apprehend the infinite through the movement of through the movement of sort of your mind thinking through particularity, right? So you sort of comprehend particulars, and then you realize, you can sort of see, reason to a place where you see, the infinite is a kind of extension of particularity forever, the infinite. But that's not what Descartes is saying. Descartes is saying the apprehension of the infinite is a kind of singular, absolute moment that any apprehension of any particularity is predicated on, if that makes any sense. So there is, I mean, and many people have pointed out, there's a kind of Neoplatonic language here. There's the apprehension of the one, right? That seems to make sense to me. But it would, just within the more narrow context of the argument, for Descartes, this is crucially important, because what it means is that when we have that apprehension, it's this very striking way in which, and I think, Daniel, maybe this is to your question, that it is this really striking moment of a kind of absolute apprehension of the face of God, almost, as it were, right? The absolute infinite and all of these things. And in that moment, we apprehend our particularity, our finitude, our frailty even, right? Our inability to know things absolutely, kind of substantially. But it also assures us that there is an all-knowing, etc., all-perfect being that is the author of our thoughts, or at least some of them. And at this point, he's going to go prove in Meditation 5 that it must be all of them, but at least some of them, or at least most of them. We still can make up ideas about things, but of the some particular modes, all of them. So that then gives us, so on the one hand, it kind of, it creates this profound separation, maybe difference there, but it also gives us a kind of methodological way back into having certainty of the world. Because we can, this is now meditation 5, we can understand, we can apprehend and know that God, as the author of our thoughts, both of himself and of mathematical knowledge and then of the world, doesn't deceive us. And so that we have some now new sense of where the fault lies, and we can talk about that. That's meditation 4. And therefore we're allowed to go forward. What's so striking about this, amazing, is, and weird, I think, for many people, is that is because there is this real sense in which God is willing that all the time, absolutely, that we can comprehend the world as it's immediately apparent to us. So it isn't, in fact, our senses that give us that bedrock primary knowledge of the world. It's the sort of constant activity of God making available to us certain knowledge of the world which we inhabit.
Just one more thing, then we'll open up to the group. To round all that off, going forward into the next couple of weeks, how does Descartes prepare us for next week? We're doing Voltaire and Rousseau. We'll be looking at Kant and such. How does Descartes prepare us for these folks?
Nothing can prepare anyone for Rousseau. That is just like, it's like getting I don't know what that is. Good luck with. What are you reading by Rousseau?
Dr. Cassidy is going to get back to me tomorrow and tell us what we're reading.
Okay, perfect. Well, I mean, Daniel, maybe I can say this. I think there's in Descartes a commitment that the world, what he calls extended substance, right? Extended substance. So thinking, he says, thinking thing, thinking substance. This drove Hobbes bananas, thinking substance. This, like, Hobbes lost his lovely empiricist mind on this one. But Descartes says, look, thinking substance, there's two things. There's thinking substance and res cogitans and res extended substance, right? So the world is full of these things like pens and lights and bodies that are divisible and have extension in time and space. Okay, so Descartes says, look, with this distinction, what Descartes sort of makes, I think, I mean, he's not the only one certainly, but he makes it, you see it in him in a way that's very striking. The world becomes available to us as a thing that can be thought and known using what I talked about earlier, the natural light of reason. Now, so this gets taken up enormously. That's a terrible way to put it, but this really gets taken up. This really has wheels. Like, so this and it still continues, I think. But this idea that the world can be known by us in its reality, right? And in a certain way, the way it gets taken up in an unmediated way through reason is very much there, I think, in Descartes. But as I said before, and it's captured in the sort of movement between these two meditations, like that in a way is only part of Descartes, because for Descartes, the whole thing is hinged on this prior conception of the sort of absolute presence of God, right? But what's so interesting, I think, is that that part of the argument can almost gets canceled out or something. It's a bit like with the Bacon, with the sort of evangelical Edenic vision that sort of gets dropped out for in the ensuing years, and what gets picked up on, what gets sort of carried forward, is this sort of self-constituted rational being, for whom the world it can be known sort of immediately. The other thing that Descartes, in a way that's very striking with Descartes, and so significant, partly it has to do with a sort of mechanistic view of the cosmos and everything, is that, and you can see this in his analytical geometry, that mathematics, and Galileo has the same argument, it gives the same argument. Mathematics is the language, and the way Galileo puts it so beautiful, that the book of nature is written in mathematics. That's what Galileo says, right? So this idea that to know the world in its precisely is to know it mathematically. That's only available to you, it seems to me, if you've moved past or regressed, depending how you feel about these things, from thinking that the things that seem apparent to us in the world are not substantially true, right? So the world seems to be full of rivers and trees and forests, but actually what we learn from science is that it's atoms and whatever, right? So that in that Descartes begins to make that movement, and that becomes very much part of the machinery of modern science and following Descartes. So important. So Voltaire draws on that, certainly. I don't know Voltaire very well, I have to say, but Rousseau's such a peculiar thinker. I mean, there's a way in which Rousseau wants to take all of that up, and another way in which he wants to throw it all into a big fire. So I think Rousseau is a different kettle of fish in a certain sense. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Scott.
Okay.
Sorry, Scott wrote something in the chat.
Oh, shit, here. I can see that. Let me see. As I understand it, this is Scott, okay. As I understand it, Descartes thought of the physical universe as deterministic, except insofar as it is acted on by mind. But the mind isn't, oh, Scott, that's so great. But the mind is not deterministic. Have I got that right? And if so, how does he think the non-determinism of the mind arises? Was he being rigorous here? Oh, now I don't know Lemaitre winkling out a genuine weakness. Okay, so Scott, you're going to have to tell me about that critique of Descartes, because I don't know it. I don't think he thinks it's deterministic, though, in a hard Leibnizian sense. But yes, please tell me.
Okay, bear in mind, I'm thinking of stuff I read 40 years back, so I can't put this together very well. But Lemaitre was about a century later, and it seemed he criticised the need for dualism, most famously in things like La Machine, where he saw the mind as being a part of the body, and hence he seemed to be carrying Descartes' views to some sort of logical conclusion that you don't need the separate mind. You have a purely materialistic universe. I find this sort of thing an interesting question, because the way physics stands at the moment, you have determinism and you have randomness, although you can argue both the same. But finding room for non-deterministic free will is quite difficult, and I'm wondering, Descartes probably banged his head against that problem. I'm just wondering how how he dealt with it.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Sorry, I had to lean down because I'm quite deaf. Scott, I think my sense is that this is maybe another inheritance from Descartes, that the sort of in physics, the deterministic universe, I think, and my memory is, and you know, this may be not right, or this may be very limited, but it's that Laplace, this is whatever this is, what is this, late 1700s, early 1800s, was sort of the high watermark of this, right? That you know, that this is sort of the great victory of the Newtonian picture, now moving into all the various branches of physics. I don't think now. I think maybe the way into this thought is through Descartes' account of the will, as you pointed to. And I think particularly his very peculiar argument that God, I mean, one of the things that's striking about Descartes and makes him different, I think, than some of the rationalist philosophers who follow him is, and I'm thinking of Leibniz here, though I'm not an expert on Leibniz, so be warned, but his account of so because mathematical knowledge is not actually a certainty for Descartes, what that means is knowledge of mathematics is one of these, our mathematical apprehension of things, of our apprehension of mathematical entities is, in a certain real sense for Descartes, of the same moment as our apprehension of the physical world. It's just, in one sense, he's quite funny on this, right? Because in some times he talks about these modes of knowing as being the same, and sometimes he gives them a hierarchy, right? So both seem to be kind of operating in him, but mathematical knowledge for Descartes, in some real way, it isn't different than our apprehension of the physical world. And our certainty in mathematical knowledge isn't a certainty in the in it of its own accord because of its self-evident quality or something like that. Our certainty in it is of the same form as our certainty in our knowledge of the physical world, which is to say, it is because of our certainty of the presence and perfection of God that we know that our apprehension of mathematical entities is true. So he is not deceiving us in this regard. But that means there's no, if I take it, my way of reading this is there's no moment in Descartes where you can do an end run around God to mathematics, if I can put it that way. That you must always be moving. All of that certainty is made available to us absolutely foundationally because of this, because of the activity of this perfect, all-powerful, etc. God, who's always making that available to us as a form of knowledge. So in that way, it's the I'd want to say, so this sort of mechanized or the machinery, this is the language and he does have a mechanized universe, there's no question, but the machinery of that machinery of those mechanisms, for Descartes, isn't sort of self-evident or isn't self-driven. It's precisely willed at every moment by God, actively, I think, as is our understanding of it. Yeah. Does that help? Is that, yeah.
Yes, I think so. So if I understand it, you're saying that both the justification for free will and the justification for a mechanical universe come at the same level. You can't really throw out one without throwing out the other.
Yeah, and I think his account of the will is very peculiar too. And I don't know if this is in Meditation 4. I don't know if this will help you or not, but I mean, for Descartes, Descartes says in Meditation 4, look, the will, he says something so extraordinary. He says, when it comes to the will, our will is not different in kind than the will of God. He says it's absolutely free. And what he wants, and then he goes on to say that the highest expression of the freedom of our will comes from our ability to grant assent to things that we know to be true. Okay, so for him, choice is a very low form of the freedom of the will. That the high form of the freedom of the will is the sort of completion of mathematics. For him is the example he uses. That is where he sees our will at its most free, because it's most unencumbered, that we can just simply say yes to something or no to something with clarity and it feels sort of inevitable. But so that why am I telling you this? That this is why. So I think for Descartes, and there may be some implications to this, but I think for Descartes, he curiously understands the will not as in the realm of choice, the ability to do this or that. In the same way, it's more, he ties it more somehow to our judgment and its relation to contemplation, to understanding. That we are able to make true and false judgments easily is sort of the expression of our free will. So it's very, yeah, that's where his sort of worries about free will exist. So it seems that moment of contemplation, of understanding, is the one that he wants to hold up as being this sort of the self-constituting one, right? From Meditation 2, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, well, that's a good question.
Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? Put your hand up or anything like that. Go for this.
Hello, Professor. I'm just curious. It seems like what you're talking about, this sort of apprehension of the world as presented to us in our senses is like its truth is constituted almost as a kind of revelation. Is that fair to say? Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious.
I used that word, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay, yeah.
I'm just curious how we might relate. We might, like, part of the base curiosity is just, is Descartes talking about like the Judeo-Christian God, or a sort of philosophical, like necessary God thing? And so the question is how, like, that kind of revelation might relate to what would be the common revelation of the Christian religion. You know, whether you know, I guess it's in essence whether he's talking about the God that a Christian might be thinking of, or like something else.
Yeah. It's a good question. So the easy, I guess the simple answer, which isn't really an answer in the end, is that he seems to want to play this both ways. So in the introduction to Meditations, it was a letter where he addresses that problem. So Descartes very quickly accused of atheism. His books are put on the banned index 1660 or something like that. In this letter at the beginning, what he says is that he thinks it's important, and I use the word revelation to defend myself against the questioning of Lucy, and it may have been a bad word, but I'm going to stick with it.
No, I thought it was great.
Okay. I think he says he wants to prove he thinks it's important to prove the existence of God without sort of moving toward theology. That's what he says. So he doesn't. So that's a quick way of saying in his explicit program there, he's trying to not give us a kind of traditional account of Christian revelation. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons for that, I think, and you can have sort of boring historical ones, or which aren't boring, or I think are pretty important, which are like that we have. I mean, Descartes is living in Amsterdam at the time, and is very, and so there's a Catholic Protestant issue there that he's feeling, I think, pretty sharply. He's left France precisely because of his concerns about some of the tensions that are in the Roman Catholic Church at that point. So that at the explicit level, he is saying that he is giving us access to an account of God that doesn't depend on a kind of theology of Christian revelation. But his argument is that by doing that, it will be a kind of defense of Christianity against atheism, right? That's his argument. Now, a lot of people say, well, of course he's saying that. He's just scared about getting, his thumbs cut off or something, and blah, 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 blah. But that's his argument. But I think your question's a deeper one. It seems to me, his argument is that there's nothing in my account that is that is in any way challenges the Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church that I am part, like the orthodoxy of the Roman Catholic Church of which he was a part of. So that's his official position. I've written it in this way so I can defend Christianity against atheism. It's important to have a kind of proof for the existence of God that operates in a way that's independent of any particular theological commitments. That's his language around it. But I think your deeper question is well put. So the God, and I've used, if there's a revealed God in the Meditations, it is the revelation of the God that's revealed is beyond properties, right? Precisely beyond properties, and is infinite and so this apprehension of this God, that it would seem could be just, you know, that could be that sort of philosopher's God that gets talked about with Descartes. That is to say, yeah, that a philosopher's God. That is to say, one that is that doesn't look very Christian. Yeah. In the way he's formulated it. Does that help? Is it where is that that answers somewhat? Yeah. Yeah. So you are, yes, that both of those things are kind of operating. Yeah. Yeah.
Professor Hall, thank you so much for all of this. I'm conscious that it's coming up to 9 o'clock here in the UK, and our community has to go for night prayer in a few minutes. So I just wanted to take this opportunity just to wrap up and just say thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. It's been such a gift, I think. Speak for everyone on that.
Thank you, Lucy. I still haven't answered your question, just so you know, but that's okay. I skated around it long enough that we came to the end. Ha ha!
And it's perhaps one to just, it's one that, you know, we can all kind of reflect on and perhaps chew over for a while, because I don't have an answer for it either, so that's why I asked it.
I think well, anyway, there's lots to think about there. Thank you so much. I just think the project you guys are involved in is just so wonderful. So I appreciate so much being able to take part. Okay, God bless.
Take care. Bye, everybody.